You're fired. Hand in your apron. The soft, golden light from Rosie's grill shimmered faintly against the darkness as Olivia Chen ran a rag across the counter, wrapping up her shift. It had been another long day, not exciting or glamorous, but just enough to help her stay ahead on rent and keep the lights on. Outside the wide front window, the neon sign offering 50% off for veterans buzzed faintly, casting a muted red glow over the rain-slicked sidewalk. The place wasn't anything fancy, but it had a kind of worn-in charm, cracked red vinyl booths, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and a dusty old jukebox in the corner that hadn't played a tune in years. The doorbell jingled with a soft chime. Olivia's eyes lifted just in time to see an elderly woman step slowly into the diner. Every movement she made was deliberate, like she was carrying some invisible burden too heavy to ignore. Her cardigan looked well-worn, her shoes scuffed from years of use, and between her hands, she clutched a carefully folded military cap like it was something sacred. A pang tightened in Olivia's chest. There was something in the way the woman held that cap, like it was all she had left of someone who once meant everything. Olivia offered a kind smile as she stepped toward her. "Welcome to Rosie's. Just you tonight?" The woman paused, her eyes hesitant, then gave a small nod. "Yes, dear. Just me." Her voice was gentle, but carried the weight of exhaustion. Without a word, Olivia guided her to a quiet booth near the window. The woman eased herself into the seat, setting the cap down in front of her as though it belonged to someone else, someone who ought to be sitting there instead. Olivia felt her throat tighten and turned toward the coffee pot, trying to push the emotion aside. A few minutes later, she returned with a fresh cup, pouring the steaming liquid gently into a mug and placing it in front of the woman. "Have you decided on what you'd like to order?" The woman glanced briefly at the menu, but just as quickly looked away. Her fingers clung to the cap now, gripping the fabric as if she could draw courage from it. I don't have enough," she said quietly, barely more than a whisper. Olivia's chest ached. She'd seen this before, folks who couldn't bring themselves to ask for help, no matter how badly they needed it. Without missing a beat, she gave the woman a warm smile. "It's on me." The woman's head snapped up, eyes wide and filled with a mix of surprise and embarrassment. I can't let you do that," she murmured, shaking her head as if the idea itself pained her. Olivia crouched slightly, reaching out to rest a gentle hand on top of hers. "It's just a meal," she said softly. Then her gaze shifted to the cap on the table. "And it looks like you've more than earned it." The woman's lower lip quivered. She swallowed hard, blinking fast as if trying to stop the tears that threatened to fall. After what felt like an eternity, she gave a tiny nod. "Thank you," she whispered. Olivia didn't press for more. She simply gave her hand a reassuring pat, then rose and made her way to the register. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a wrinkled $20 bill, and rang the order up herself without hesitation. She couldn't have known then that this single act of quiet kindness was about to set everything in motion. The gentle hum of Rosie's grill felt oddly distant as Olivia slid the crumpled bill into the register and finalized the order. It wasn't a big gesture, but it was enough to offer the woman something warm to eat, and more importantly, a bit of her dignity back. She had just set the plate down in front of the booth when a sharp voice sliced through the stillness. "Olivia." A word. Her stomach turned. She recognized that tone all too well. Turning slowly, she saw Greg Simmons, the diner's manager, framed in the doorway of his office. His arms were folded across his chest, and while his face gave away little, the tight clench of his jaw said more than enough. Olivia inhaled through her nose and steadied herself. "Yes, Greg." Greg stepped out and made his way to the counter, his eyes flicking to the meal in front of the woman. "Did she pay for that?" Olivia's throat was dry. "No." He let out a sharp breath. "Then who did?" She met his eyes without flinching. "I did." His expression darkened instantly. "You paid? With your own money?" Olivia gave a single nod. Yes. Greg scoffed. And you actually thought that was acceptable? Olivia's hands clenched tightly at her sides. She's the wife of a veteran, Greg. All she wanted was something warm to eat. Greg let out a humorless chuckle. And that's not your concern, he replied flatly. The woman shifted in her booth, visibly uneasy, her eyes dropping to the floor. Olivia felt a slow burn of frustration flare in her chest. So what now? She shot back. We're just tossing out the families of veterans because they've hit hard times. Greg's mouth flattened into a cold, unforgiving line. When you break the rules, you face the consequences, he said, voice like ice. That's how things work here. Then, without another word, he turned toward the elderly woman. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The diner fell into a thick silence. The woman's hands trembled as she reached out for the cap on the table, her cheeks flushed with shame. And that was the moment Olivia broke. Something inside her snapped like a dry branch. She stood there, knowing she had a choice to make, stay quiet to protect her job, or speak up for what she believed was right. She chose no. That one word hung in the air, clear and defiant. Greg's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. Olivia squared her shoulders, grounding herself. She's not going anywhere. Greg stepped forward, looming over her, trying to reassert control. This is my diner. If I say she goes, she goes. But Olivia didn't budge. Then you'll have to toss me out first. A long, tense pause followed. Neither of them moved. The entire place seemed to hold its breath. Greg's nostrils flared with irritation. Then, finally, he spoke. You're fired. Even though she'd braced herself for it, the word still knocked the air out of her like a punch to the ribs. The older woman gasped softly. Oh no, sweetheart, I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Olivia turned to her, forcing a calm smile despite the tight knot in her chest. Please, don't apologize, she said gently. You didn't do anything wrong. With deliberate care, she reached behind her neck, untied her apron, and folded it neatly, placing it on the counter like a final act of closure. Her hands were steady, even though her heartbeat wasn't. Greg smirked smugly. Doors that way. Olivia lifted her chin. Yeah. I know where it is. She turned toward the exit, each step heavier than the one before. And just as she reached for the handle, the bell above the door chimed. The door swung open. And in walked a group of soldiers. Olivia froze. 5 men in uniform entered with quiet, composed steps. There was a stillness to them, a kind of silent authority that made everyone in the diner stop and look. Customers twisted in their seats to get a better view. A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Greg's confident smirk vanished instantly. The lead soldier, tall with sharp features and a steady gaze, scanned the space before locking eyes with Olivia. Which one of you is Olivia Chen? He asked, voice firm but calm. Olivia's brows pulled together in confusion. I am, she said. The man gave a single nod. We need to speak with you. Greg quickly tried to reassert control. Gentlemen, this isn't a military base. If you're here for a meal, we'd be happy to. But the soldier didn't even look in his direction. His attention stayed on Olivia. We heard about what happened here tonight. Olivia's heart began to race. How did you? Before she could finish, he turned his attention to the booth behind her. Ma'am, he said gently, is it true you're the wife of Lieutenant Colonel James Graves? The woman gasped. Her mouth opened, though no words came at first. Finally, after a long, emotional pause, she gave a slow nod. Yes, I am. The soldiers immediately stood a little straighter, their expressions sharpening. One of them, a younger man with a thin scar tracing down his cheek, stepped forward. I served under your husband, ma'am, he said softly. He saved my life. A quiet sob slipped from her lips. She raised a trembling hand to her mouth as tears began to spill freely down her cheeks. Olivia felt her own throat constrict, emotion catching her off guard. The lead soldier turned his attention back to Olivia. "What you did tonight," he said, "didn't go unnoticed." Her thoughts spun in every direction. "I only paid for her meal," she said under her breath, unsure why it had become such a big moment. But the soldier shook his head slowly. "No. It was more than that. You showed her the respect that most people don't bother to give." His gaze shifted to Greg for just a second, sharp and deliberate. Greg fidgeted, clearly uneasy now. The soldier went on. "And respect like that? We don't take it for granted." Olivia stood there, not knowing how to respond. Her fists were still tight at her sides, adrenaline buzzing through her limbs. Greg scoffed, trying to reclaim authority. "Well, this is all very touching," he said dryly. "But she doesn't work here anymore. She's free to leave." The soldier offered a small smile, but it didn't carry an ounce of warmth. "Oh, she's leaving," he said. "But she's coming with us." Olivia's eyes widened. "With you?" she repeated, trying to make sense of it. The soldier nodded. "There's someone who wants to meet you." A twist of nerves fluttered in Olivia's stomach. Greg glanced nervously between them, his face tightening. "Who?" Olivia asked, her voice low. The soldier's lips curved into a slight, knowing smile. "You'll find out soon enough." Olivia remained rooted in place, struggling to process everything that had just unfolded. "There's someone who wants to meet you." The soldier's words echoed in her mind. She swallowed hard. Who could it possibly be? And why did it suddenly feel like she'd been swept into something much bigger than herself? Behind her, Greg, now officially her ex-boss, gave a sarcastic little laugh, folding his arms across his chest. "This is absurd," he muttered. "She's just a waitress. Not some kind of war hero." The lead soldier's head snapped in Greg's direction, his eyes narrowed. Greg visibly recoiled, taking a cautious step back. "No," the soldier said coolly. "But she knows what honor looks like. And honestly, that's more than I can say for some people in this room." Greg opened his mouth like he wanted to fire back, but then shut it again. There was nothing left to say. Olivia stood in stunned silence, a storm of emotions surging through her: confusion, disbelief, nervous energy, and something else she couldn't quite name. Just minutes ago, she had come to terms with losing her job. But now, surrounded by soldiers, that felt like the least important thing that had happened all night. The lead soldier gestured toward the door. "Come with us." Olivia hesitated. Her eyes drifted back to the booth where the elderly woman still sat. Her face was puffy with tears, hands trembling slightly. But something in her gaze had changed. There was a lightness now. A quiet release. Olivia gave her a small, reassuring nod. Then she turned back to the soldiers, took a steadying breath, and followed them out. The air outside hit cool against her skin, and long shadows stretched across the street beneath the glow of streetlights. A military vehicle idled quietly at the curb, its engine humming. "Where are we going?" Olivia asked, glancing sideways as one of the soldiers opened the door for her. "You'll know soon enough," he replied. She climbed into the back seat, nerves fluttering wildly inside her. The door closed behind her with a dull thud, and just like that, the vehicle pulled away from Rosie's grill. The cabin fell into silence as the city lights slid past the windows. Olivia turned her gaze outside, her thoughts racing in 100 directions. Why me? Why tonight? What could possibly be so important that a whole unit of soldiers would come find me? Time blurred. Eventually, the vehicle slowed as it turned onto a quieter road flanked by towering iron fences. At the far end of the quiet street stood a large, brightly lit building, its windows glowing against the dark sky. An American flag fluttered gently in the evening breeze out front, illuminated by a spotlight. It hit Olivia all at once. A military base. Her stomach turned with nerves. The vehicle eased to a stop, and the door swung open. The lead soldier gave her a nod and gestured for her to step out. She did, her shoes crunching softly over the gravel as she climbed down. "Right this way," he said. They walked together toward the building, passing several uniformed guards along the way. Each one gave a respectful nod as the soldiers escorted her forward. Everything about the moment felt surreal. Olivia had the distinct feeling she'd crossed into a completely different world, one far removed from greasy diner counters and late-night coffee. The lead soldier opened a side entrance and held the door for her. She stepped inside, and froze. Her breath caught in her throat. There, behind a massive oak desk, sat a high-ranking officer, his uniform perfectly pressed, every medal on his chest gleaming. He sat tall, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. But it wasn't the decorations or authority that struck Olivia. It was the expression in his eyes, a deep, quiet gratitude that needed no explanation. As she entered the room, the officer stood up and looked directly at her. "You must be Olivia Chen," he said, his voice calm and composed, yet undeniably warm. Olivia nodded, trying to steady her breath. "Yes, sir." He motioned toward the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat." She hesitated for a beat before sitting down. The weight of the moment pressed gently down on her shoulders. The officer leaned in slightly, resting his forearms on the desk. "I heard what happened tonight," he said. Olivia swallowed hard. I didn't think it was a big deal. It was just a meal." His mouth tightened slightly. "Maybe not to you. But to us, it meant everything." Then he opened a drawer beside him and pulled out a small, framed photograph. He turned it so she could see. Olivia's breath hitched. It was a picture of the elderly woman from the diner, much younger, standing proudly beside a man in uniform. He looked strong, self-assured, his arm wrapped around his wife with affection and pride. The officer exhaled deeply. Lieutenant Colonel James Graves was one of the finest men I ever had the privilege of serving with. On the battlefield, he saved lives. Off the battlefield, he gave everything for his country. Olivia felt her throat tighten painfully. She could only nod slightly, overwhelmed. The officer's gaze locked with hers once again. His wife has spent the last several years trying to survive, doing her best to get by. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, someone reminded her that her husband's sacrifice still matters. That she still matters. Tears stung at the corners of Olivia's eyes. She blinked them back rapidly. "You didn't just cover the cost of a dinner," the officer went on. "You gave her back something she'd been losing piece by piece, her dignity. And around here? That's not something we forget." For the first time since she'd been fired, Olivia felt a flicker of something other than frustration or confusion. She felt proud. The officer stood and turned toward a small wooden box on the corner of his desk. He opened it, pulled something out, and returned to her with a small but meaningful gesture. In his hand was a pin, a military insignia, simple but unmistakably significant. He stepped around the desk and gently placed it into her palm. "This is just a small token of our appreciation," he said. "It might not look like much, but it carries weight. It's our way of saying thank you." Olivia stared down at the insignia resting in her hand. She had never worn a uniform. She'd never set foot on a battlefield. And yet, in this moment, she felt like she had done something real. Something that mattered. Looking back up at him, she whispered, "Thank you, sir." He nodded firmly. "There's one more thing," he said. "We run a veterans outreach program, and we're looking for people who care. People like you." Olivia's eyes widened with surprise. "You want me to join you?" The officer smiled, just slightly. If you're interested, yes. Olivia let out a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. Just hours earlier, she had walked away from a job she thought she needed. Now, she was being handed something far more meaningful than any paycheck. There was no hesitation. I'd be honored, she said softly. The officer extended his hand, and Olivia took it with purpose, her grip firm. And just like that, her life changed in an instant. Back at Rosie's grill, Greg Simmons stood in stunned silence, rooted in the middle of the dining room. His face had gone pale, and he was suddenly struggling to breathe evenly. Then came the sound that made it worse. Applause. It started small, a couple of patrons clapping politely near the counter, one man by the window joining in. But within seconds, the entire diner rose to their feet, the room erupting into cheers. Customers who had just moments ago been quietly eating their meals were now standing tall, clapping and nodding toward Olivia with admiration in their eyes. She did the right thing, someone shouted from the back. This is what real respect looks like, another woman called out. Greg's jaw clenched tightly. His eyes darted around the room, desperate to find even one person on his side. One sympathetic face. But there was no one. Then, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. The sharp vibration startled him. He yanked it out with sweaty hands, glancing at the screen. The name on the caller ID made his stomach churn. The owner of Rosie's Grill. Greg froze for half a second before answering. Hello. The voice on the other end was clipped, cold, and clearly furious. I just saw the video, the man snapped. Every muscle in Greg's body tensed. I can explain, he stammered. It wasn't exactly what it looked like. You fired her. The owner's voice was ice. Greg swallowed hard. Sir, What the hell were you thinking? The man barked. Do you even realize how fast this is spreading? Greg felt his pulse thundering in his ears. Spreading. His hands shook as he pulled the phone away and quickly tapped through his screen. There it was. A video, clear as day, recorded by a customer who had been sitting near the window. The entire scene was captured, and it had already racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Greg felt the blood drain from his face. The caption read, "Waitress stands up for veteran's widow, gets fired on the spot." His eyes dropped to the comments, which blurred together in a storm of outrage. This is disgusting. Boycott this place. She deserves a raise, not to be fired. Someone give this girl a better job. ASAP. Greg's grip tightened on the phone, his fingers digging into the plastic. Then the voice returned on the line, this time lower, but filled with unmistakable threat. If you don't fix this, now, I guarantee you'll be the one cleaning out your locker tomorrow. Click. The line went dead. Greg slowly lowered the phone, his heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. His eyes found Olivia again, still standing calmly by the entrance. Her face was unreadable, her expression still and patient. The applause was fading now, but the energy in the room hadn't shifted. Every person in the diner was still watching him. Greg licked his lips, his tongue dry as dust. He forced a breath, then stepped forward, searching for any words that might save face. "Olivia," he said with a strange smile, one that came off more like a twitch. I think we may have acted a little too quickly." She didn't answer right away, just tilted her head ever so slightly, silently observing him. Greg gave an awkward laugh, desperate to regain control. "I mean, we could talk it over. Maybe reconsider though." But Olivia raised a hand. "Stop." Greg blinked. "What?" She inhaled slowly, grounding herself. And in that moment, standing in the same diner where she'd spent so many thankless nights, Olivia felt something stir inside her. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Power. "I don't need this job," she said, her tone steady and sure. Truth is, I never did. Greg's mouth opened like he was about to speak, but no words came out. He stood there floundering, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Olivia gave a slight shake of her head. You didn't let me go because I broke the rules, she said, her voice sharper now. You fired me because you didn't have the courage to do what was right. Greg's face turned a deep shade of red, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. Olivia took a slow step back, letting her words hang in the air like a final verdict. Then, without giving him, or anyone else, a second glance, she walked out of the diner for good. She had barely made it onto the sidewalk when the low, growling sound of an engine caught her attention. Olivia froze. A massive military vehicle rolled to a stop in front of the diner, its headlights casting long beams across the pavement. The door opened, and a soldier stepped out, the same man who had stood up for her inside not long ago. But this time, he wasn't alone. Another vehicle pulled up behind the first. Then a third. A full convoy. A chill ran up Olivia's spine, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The soldier walked toward her with a familiar, knowing smile. Miss Chen, he said as he came to a stop a few feet away. Olivia swallowed, feeling her pulse skip. Yeah, she replied cautiously. He studied her for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. Without a word, he extended it to her. She hesitated, then took it from his hand. As she unfolded the page, her eyes widened, breath catching in her throat. It wasn't just a letter. It was a job offer. I told you, the soldier said, his voice even and calm, there's someone who's been wanting to meet you. Olivia's grip on the paper tightened. She looked back up at him, her mind still trying to catch up with what was happening. What kind of job is this? She asked, cautious but intrigued. His smile deepened slightly, a flicker of respect behind it. The kind where you can actually make a difference. Olivia stared at him, stunned. Just hours ago, she thought losing her job was the worst thing that could happen. But now, holding this letter with a military insignia stamped at the top. She wasn't so sure. Maybe it was the best thing that could have happened. The soldier took a step back and gestured toward the vehicle behind him. Well, he said with a small grin. You coming? Olivia exhaled a long, steady breath. Then she nodded. Without another word, she climbed into the back of the vehicle, leaving behind the life she thought she needed, and stepping into something completely new. Inside the cabin, Olivia sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the offer in her hands. Her fingers lightly traced the embossed military seal at the top of the letterhead, as if touching it might make it feel more real. Even now, she could hardly believe it. Just earlier that day, she was waiting tables, trying to make ends meet. Now, she was being invited into something far bigger than herself. Across from her sat the soldier, watching her calmly. A different kind of job, she asked, her voice softer than she expected. He nodded once. We're expanding our outreach efforts for veterans and their families, he said. And we're looking for people who care. People who don't turn away when it's hard. People like you. Olivia's breath hitched. Her entire life had been about survival, clocking in, clocking out, paying bills, staying afloat. She'd never thought of herself as someone who could change things. But this felt like purpose. Her thoughts drifted back to the elderly woman in the diner. The way she had clung to that faded military cap, holding it like it was the last piece of her husband she had left. Olivia had seen firsthand how harsh the world could be, how easily it turned its back on the very people who had given everything. Now, for the first time, she had a real chance to do something about it. She let out a slow breath. What exactly would I be doing? She asked, her voice steady but curious. The soldier gave a slight, knowing smile, picking up on the shift in her energy. You'd be helping veterans' families, he explained. Making sure they don't slip through the cracks. We need people who can connect, people who get it. And you already do. Olivia studied him, quiet for a moment. Her mind drifted back to the diner. To Greg's cold dismissal of that elderly woman, treating her like she didn't exist. How many others were out there, living through the same quiet kind of hurt? This was her opportunity to be the person who saw them. She looked up and met the soldier's eyes. "I'm in," she said. His smile widened. "Good choice." And with that, the vehicle rolled forward, carrying her away from everything she thought she needed, towards something entirely new. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Olivia Chen's name was everywhere. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, text after call after message. Friends, relatives, even people she hadn't heard from in years were reaching out with words of gratitude and congratulations. She wasn't sure what was happening until she flipped on the TV. And there she was, her own face staring back at her from the screen. A national news anchor spoke over footage from the diner. The story of a young waitress who stood up for a veteran's widow, and lost her job in the process, has touched hearts across the nation. What had started as one simple act of kindness had exploded into something far bigger. A movement. A conversation about how we treat the people who've given the most, and those they leave behind. Olivia's stomach fluttered as she watched the segment unfold. There it was, clear as day. The moment she stood up to Greg. The way she untied her apron and walked out. The soldiers arriving. Then the story cut to social media reactions, flashing on screen one after another. This is what humanity looks like. More people like Olivia, please. Veterans deserve better, and so do their families. A lump formed in Olivia's throat. She had only done what felt right in the moment. She never expected any of this. Then the anchor's voice returned. Following an outpouring of support, several organizations have come forward with new opportunities for Olivia, including a veterans advocacy program where she'll work directly with military families. Olivia blinked. It was real. All of it. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down at the screen. It was a message from the woman she'd served that night. "Thank you, Olivia. I thought the world had forgotten about us. But because of you, I know that's not true." Olivia brought a hand to her mouth, emotions crashing over her. She had lost a job, but she had found something far more meaningful. She had found her purpose. A reason to stand up. To serve those who had once served. And all of it had started with one quiet, simple act of compassion. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't just impact someone else, it transforms your own life, too. These days, kindness can feel like a lost art. People are rushing, distracted, afraid to speak up when something's clearly wrong. But Olivia's story is proof. One moment of courage can start a chain reaction. She didn't hesitate when she saw someone in need. She didn't help for the recognition. She helped because it was the right thing to do. And somehow, that small decision rippled outward, turning into something powerful. How often do we pass by someone who needs help and convince ourselves it's not our problem? A veteran quietly counting coins at the store. An elderly neighbor struggling to carry groceries. A single mother short on change at the register. It's easy to look away. But imagine if we didn't. What if, instead, we chose to step in? To lend a hand. To speak up. To act. Even when no one's watching. Because here's the truth. The world isn't changed by grand, dramatic gestures. It's changed by small, everyday moments of human decency. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that restored your faith in humanity? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, subscribe to Uncovered Tales, where real-life heroes remind us that integrity still matters. Because some stories don't just change lives. They change hearts.